So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to week 3 of Sacred Pathways. Thank you for sticking with it for at least 3 weeks. It's really good to see you all. And just to say that next week we are not meeting. So there's no Sacred Pathways next week.
Why not?
It's not because it's Valentine's Day, it's because I'm away. I've managed to book myself on a conference for Valentine's Day. Yes.
Valentine's Day is every day.
Well, thank you. Can you tell Sally? Comment was Valentine's Day is every day. In case you have missed some of the weeks, just a very brief reminder of what we're doing. This course is based on a book written by an American chap called Gary Thomas, in which he identifies 9 different ways in which people can encounter God. He calls them sacred pathways. And all of us will find some of them more attractive, some of them easier to engage with than others. That's to be expected because all of us have a different spiritual personality. All of us are a blend of these different spiritual preferences and different spiritual pathways. So, if one week really doesn't scratch where you itch, please don't give up, because I'm pretty confident we'll get to something that you will find you can really engage with nearer the end of the course, if not at the beginning. But I hope you haven't got to wait till week 9 before you get there. Each week I'm giving you a worksheet to take home. You don't have to bring them back. I'm not going to mark them or anything. Just to help you to work out how you engage with that week's particular pathway. And over the course of the 9 weeks, you'll gradually build up a sense of where your spiritual preferences lie and the areas that you perhaps wouldn't naturally find God more easily, but might be worth trying from time to time. The book is kind of available on long order. So if you would like a copy of the book, then if you see Mike, he can order one for you. It'll be about 3 weeks, apparently, before it arrives.
That's what they're saying, but it looks scarce.
Approximately 3 weeks. Sorry?
How much is it?
How much is it? It's...
They are officially $11.99, but we'll do them for $9.99.
Well, special deal. Thank you, Mike. The content that we're exploring is the same sort of thing each week as is in the book. The book obviously has got more time to go into a bit more detail. And just so that you know, if you get the book and you think, hold on, how does this match up? I've changed the names of most of the pathways because they're a bit churchy in the book. So I've tried to make them slightly more accessible. But they are in the same order, so if you're on week 3 in this, you'll be on chapter 3 in the book. If you do miss a week, then this is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel, and we have some folk, I hope, joining us live this evening, live streaming on YouTube as well. If you go on to Martley Baptist Church on YouTube, I think under the Live tab, you'll find the recordings. Okay, so, introduction over with. This week we are looking at finding God in rituals and symbols. Now actually, as unusual as you might think this sounds, we have rituals and symbols as part of our everyday life. Today you will have dealt with some symbols. If you've driven in your car, you've seen road signs, I hope. Whether you obeyed them or not, I will leave down to you. But if you have sent a text with an emoji today, you've used a symbol. If you've seen some traffic lights and to help you cross the road, you've seen the green man and the red man, and they're all symbols. Symbols are everywhere. In many ways, a symbol is a shortcut to give us an idea of a more detailed instruction. What about rituals? Well, you've done rituals today, probably. If you've cleaned your teeth, which you do every day according to the dentist, saw mine last week and got a clean bill of health for another year, so. Doing something every day is a ritual. Now there's a purpose behind it. You want your teeth to be clean, but you do it, it's the repetition. Do you put the bins out every week? As long as you can work out which one it is, which day, which week. I don't know whether it's true in your road. We have someone, our next door neighbour actually, who seems to put the bins out for almost everybody. It doesn't go as far as you, Pam?
No.
Oh.
Opposite, yeah.
Opposite. So first thing, or sort of last thing, the previous day, our neighbour will be going up and down the road putting different bins out. So we don't have to think about which bin it is, because he does it for us. Bless him. He's so kind. And then he goes and puts them all back again afterwards. He's almost chasing the bin lorry down the road. I wonder sometimes if he gets there before they've got to the bin. But we have rituals that we do all the time. But we don't think of them as rituals. And we don't think of those things that I've just identified as symbols. We just naturally know what they are. So when it comes to this sacred pathway, what we're exploring are routines, habits, images, practices, symbols, things that remind us of God or things that point us to God. And maybe you've got a repertoire of these already. Maybe this evening you'll learn some new ones. As you can probably imagine, the Bible is full of rituals and symbols that people have found helpful in their relationship with God. In the Old Testament, the bit before Jesus, if there was a specific encounter with God, often the people will build an altar there, usually a pile of stones, to record the fact that something special happened. Sometimes they would even change the name of the place to signify that something special happened. Sometimes they would change a person's name to signify that something special happened.
Like I changed my name when I was adopted, Nicholas.
You changed your name? Well, there's nothing wrong with Nicholas, I have to say. Now, to try and put it a little delicately, there is one ritual in the Old Testament that certainly for men is a more painful than others. The ritual of circumcision, which was the sign that you were a male Jewish boy. Usually took place just 8 days after you were born, and they would cut off the foreskin as a sign of a special covenantal relationship with God. Ritual washing was something that went on a lot. It was an important sign that someone wanted to be spiritually clean. In Jesus' time, if you think about John the Baptist particularly, people were being baptized to show God that they were sorry. They wanted to be washed clean. There were plenty of special meals and feasts. The calendar was full of feast days and celebrations and holy days and holidays, all of which were reminders of something that had happened between God's people and God that they wanted to be remembering, commemorating, thanking God for. So the Passover is the most obvious one, the big celebration when they remembered how God had set them free from slavery in Egypt, and the angel of death had passed over the houses of the Jewish people. As we considered last week, communion, sharing of bread and wine, the Lord's Supper, in remembrance of Jesus, was something that Jesus actually brought out of the Passover feast. And we also find times in the Bible when, on a slightly more personal level, people prayed specific prayers, or they fasted to spend time with God. Now, because Jesus came from Jewish heritage, it's not surprising that he adopted and then adapted a lot of these rituals and symbols. So as I've just said, Passover became communion, which Jesus urged his friends to do in remembrance of him. He reinterpreted some of the symbols of Passover to reflect the significance of his death on the cross. Jesus went on pilgrimages, most famous perhaps when he was 12 and managed to get lost and stayed for 3 extra days in Jerusalem, confounding the religious leaders with his knowledge while his parents went frantic looking for him. Pilgrimage is a journey to a place where you expect to meet with God. Sometimes what Jesus did had a symbolic significance as well as an immediate significance. So there was an occasion when Jesus was in the temple and he saw in the courtyard, which was known as the court of the Gentiles, that it was full of money changers and traders selling animals for the sacrifices. This was the part of the temple where only part of the temple where non-Jewish people could go to pray, to meet with God. And it had been turned into a marketplace. Jesus was livid. He drove out the money changers, turned over the tables, and even actually created a whip to kind of just drive them out before him. And it was as he did so, he reminded people of one of the Psalms that speaks about how zealous someone is for the purity of the temple. But also, there's a symbol there, because as Jesus clears out the temple and the court of the Gentiles, once again, he is making it clear that anybody can come to God. And ultimately, that will be possible through him. He washed the disciples' feet. Now, at one level, it was just him cleaning off the mucky residue from the day. Mainly because actually when they were sitting at table, they weren't sitting on chairs, they were all reclining, kind of one person lying this way and then the next person kind of just lying next to them, so someone's head would be near your feet. So you'd want their feet washed. But Jesus also did it at a much deeper level as a symbol of humility and service, and an example, he said, that his followers should take. In John's record of the life of Jesus, specifically, he describes some of the miraculous things Jesus did as signs. He uses that word to describe them because he saw that in addition to the effect on the individuals, perhaps who'd been healed, these were pointing symbolically to who Jesus is. You could even say that the stories Jesus told, the parables, were symbols, because through them he pointed to truth about God and about us. So we're going to explore this evening 3 different aspects of this particular pathway. Ritual, which doesn't only include rituals in church. Symbols, not just religious ones. And sacrifice, not animal ones, but sacrifices that we might make. One of the gifts that we have is that we have a calendar. I don't necessarily mean the physical one with pictures of animals or whatever that you've got hanging up at home, but we have an annual calendar, a bit like the Jewish people, with festivals, with times of year that remind us of specific things. The big 2, Christmas and Easter, remind us of who Jesus is when he was born and what he came to do when he died and rose again. But there are others as well. We're about to, in a couple of weeks' time, enter the season of Lent. We have...
You give up something as well, don't you?
You can give up something in Lent, and we'll come back to that in Chris, yeah. And Harvest in the autumn is a festival when people particularly focus and think about God as the provider. And we can use these sorts of calendar events to prompt us to consider different aspects of who God is and our relationship with him. Now the final remnants of Christmas have been packed away, I hope. But as we enter the season of Lent, I wonder what you might think about giving up. Traditionally, we kind of give up some food. But fasting, because that's what it means, is not just about food. You could fast from social media. You could fast from watching TV. There are all sorts of things that you could fast from. The purpose isn't just to deprive yourself or to diet, in the case of leaving food behind, but actually to dedicate that act to God. To say that I'm doing this because I want to say this is important, but you're more important, God. And also, if there's something you would be doing during that period of time, so if it is watching TV or whatever, instead you could actually say, well, I'm going to devote that time to prayer or to reflection, to exploring some of the sacred pathways, something like that. So, as we begin the season of Lent, maybe this evening might inspire you to have a go at some sort of fasting. Many of us now have phones with electronic calendars on them, and I use mine as a prompt to remind me to pray or think about something on a regular basis. So, yesterday at the church meeting, we introduced some monthly daily prayers, which that's, I think, relatively descriptive of them. So we've produced 7 prayers, one for each day of the week, all based around our church values, and we're offering them to anybody who'd like to join in to pray those prayers every day. And one of the things then we'll be doing collectively is praying the same prayer. It's entirely optional, entirely voluntary, but if you'd like to, it's there. And there's some copies of the daily prayers there if you didn't get one, if you'd like one. I did send it out by email, but this is the new improved version. Okay? What I've done is to help remind me on my electronic diary, every day at 8:30, I get a message ping up saying monthly daily prayers. And just remind me, 8:30 every morning I'll be praying that day's prayer. That's because I'm forgetful and I get engrossed in other things. You could spend some time focusing your thoughts on a particular Bible passage. Often when I read the Bible, I find myself galloping through sometimes. And it's really helpful sometimes just to stop and to pause and to take your time working your way through a passage from the Bible. And there are different processes, different things you could do. So if it's a narrative, perhaps you could imagine yourself there. What can you see? What can you smell? What can you hear? What's going on? Are you part of the narrative or are you an observer? And start to imagine what it's like. And you may find that the passage comes alive for you in a new way. Another approach to Bible reading is actually to read the words aloud, because that partly forces you to slow down, but also enables you to hear your own voice. And an exercise that I'm offering this evening, not necessarily to read out loud, but if, for example, if I can find the right one, it is not there, it's over here. Right, so the passage that I'm suggesting that people might look at this evening is, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. You find it in 2 places in the Bible. I knew that was going to happen eventually. First of all in Joel, and then it's quoted later on in Luke's Gospel. In Romans, not Luke's Gospel, in Romans. And so you could just read out, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. But then, what if you put emphasis on just one word each time? Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. That's different. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord. And just each time you go through, think about how different that feels. What's the different meaning, the different emphasis coming to you? Reading the Bible every day is a really good discipline. It's a really good ritual to get involved in. If you're someone who forgets, phone reminders are a good thing. You could even put your Bible somewhere where you're not going to miss it. So put it in your slippers. So that if you can't get your foot in, oh, my Bible's there, I better remember to read it. Over the centuries, some Christians have found a discipline of a prayer habit or a prayer rule to be really helpful. Just keeping the conversation going with God, using set prayers during the day. Doesn't mean necessarily that you are going to always hear from God, but it keeps the dialogue open, it keeps the lines of communication open. There are prayer books that you can get hold of. I'm sure that the Christian Resources Project has got some. I find, don't always use them, but I sometimes find the books by a guy called David Adam, who is a kind of Celtic writer, really quite helpful. And he has morning, midday, and evening prayers that you can follow through. If you have a smartphone, then the Lectio 365 app is really good at helping you to pray and reflect on the Bible, and it follows a daily routine through the year. We're going to hear some more about that a little later on. Even something as simple as saying grace when you sit down for a meal. It's a ritual in the sense that it's a routine, but it's just helping you to think, you know what, I'm grateful to God, and not just for the food, but what else am I grateful to God for today? And it may not be a long prayer because you don't want your food to get cold, but it just keeps that relationship open. Symbols can be a really helpful way of focusing our attention on God. During the lockdown, I haven't been pressing the button, have I? During the lockdown, I created this as my Windows wallpaper because I was spending most of my day gazing at the computer screen, either on a Zoom call or other things. And I was finding myself getting a bit mesmerised by it all. But also, I found I was going from meeting to meeting to meeting on Zoom, whereas in my previous role, I would be driving from one place to another. So there was always gaps between when I could ponder and think about and pray about the meeting I've just had and the next one I'm going to. Here, the temptation was just to stack them up. So I put this on my Windows wallpaper so that every time I finished a meeting, closed it down, I reminded myself to ponder, what did God say in that meeting? What next? What's going to happen next? I remind myself to pray, gratefully interceding for the people and blessing those people. And then progress, what's coming next? Is it a time of refreshment? Am I going to have to get up and physically move for my own health? I need to disengage with that meeting before I go to the next one. And I use that image because of Mind the Gap. I wanted to make sure there was a gap. Now, it may seem trivial, it may seem silly to you, but I found that really helpful during lockdown. It's not my Windows wallpaper anymore because I'm in a different context and it doesn't feel appropriate. But it was a symbol. And it became a ritual. And those things I found really helpful. So maybe you might create yourself some symbols. It doesn't have to be on your computer. Could be anything you like that's going to help to remind you of your relationship with God and your own spiritual health. Symbols can be reminders too of what God is saying to us, just like those Old Testament altars. So you could put a cross in a place where you're going to see it often. The cross is the most obvious symbol of the Christian faith, isn't it? Some people I've seen have them hanging from their mirror in their car. I'm not entirely sure what that's saying. I know I'm going to heaven and I drive like it. Or, I don't know. But obviously they see the cross regularly. At least I hope they do if they're looking in the mirror. Or you could put a cross somewhere else in your home, somewhere you're going to see it on a regular basis. You could write a Bible verse that's become important to you on a post-it note and stick it somewhere like on the fridge or on a mirror, somewhere you're going to go to a lot, and refresh your awareness of that Bible verse. The reason that Christians focus on the cross, obviously, is because it's the moment when Jesus died, the moment when God was able to make a reconciliation between humanity and him possible. Some people wear a cross around their neck. I carry a holding cross with me. I showed you some holding crosses last week. Maybe you get a phone cover with a cross on it. Do you sell those, Mike?
Oh, covers.
Yeah.
No.
No. Okay. You'll have to go somewhere else for your phone covers. In church, we use bread and wine as really moving symbols to remind us of Jesus. He said we should do it in remembrance of him. And when we eat and we drink, we often pause. And when I'm doing that, I'm usually thinking about the enormity of what this bread and wine represent. I think they're more than just symbols. I think there's something of an encounter with the divine that happens when we share bread and wine. When early Christians were being persecuted and thrown to the lions, they came up with a secret symbol so that other Christians would know that they were Christians, but everyone else wouldn't. And this is what they came up with, the fish symbol that nowadays seems to make its appearance on the back of cars, which I think means what I just said earlier on. I'm going to heaven and I drive like it, or I brake like it. You might get a close-up view of an ichthus fish symbol. And ichthus is the Greek word for fish. I will try. I is the Greek word for a Greek letter that also is J. Okay? So I represents Jesus. CH, Christos. Jesus Christos. Theos, Pios, Soter. Still can pronounce some Greek. Theos, God. God's Son, Pios, God's Son, Saviour. And when they saw this symbol, it wasn't just like an ID badge. It was actually a reminder to them about the person who was the central core of what they believed. Jesus Christ, God's Son, Saviour. That's an amazing, brief statement of faith, isn't it? There's so much encapsulated in that. In a really simple symbol you can draw with just one quick sweep. Now, you might create your own sorts of symbols if you're particularly artistic or creative, or you might pick up symbols that other people have made. In my study upstairs and at home, I've got quite a range of different art that I have bought or been given that help me to reflect on who God is. One of them is down there next to Steve, that rather large painting. It's a picture by an artist called Siga Koda, and it's a picture he calls Jesus washing Peter's feet. So you'll get a sense of what's in the picture. But I can lose myself in that picture, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later on. But for me, it's a much more complicated symbol than ichthus. But it speaks to me of who God is. In Bible times, sometimes people would abstain from eating for a period of time, fasting, as a way of showing God that they were serious about something, to dedicate themselves to him, or actually to associate with prayer, asking God to do something. It seems to have gone out of fashion a little bit, maybe because we all like our food. But as I said, that's what Lent is all about. And it's about putting something positive into your relationship with God, not simply getting rid of something. If you are going to fast from food, please always make sure you drink plenty, stay hydrated. Some people will fast just in daylight hours, so winter fasts are much better than summer fasts. You could spend some of the time when you might have been eating a meal, listening to some Christian music, reading your Bible, praying, trying out one of the sacred pathways. And as I said, it doesn't have to be just food. But we can offer things to God as an act of worship. In church, we give financially as an act of worship. Physically, some put money in the offering plates, some tap their cards on the card reader, others give through bank accounts or online giving. But it's an act of worship. It's a way of dedicating ourselves, what we have. It's kind of a representative function, a symbolic function, saying all that we have is yours, God, but in particular, this is for you. But giving to God isn't only financial. You could give him something that you can do as an act of worship. It could be creative, a drawing, a poem, a painting, a song, whatever it is. But it could be something a little bit left field. I heard of one church that was set up for young people who like skateboarding. And they converted a warehouse into a skate park. But they would have skate church. So once a week they'd have a very unorthodox church service there. And what the young people would do as an act of worship was they would perform their latest trick, their latest skill. Not to show off, but actually to say to God, look, I can do this for you. This is for you. Now, I don't know how many of you ride skateboards. Looking around, don't know that there's many of us. But what could we do as an act of worship to God? Just to say, I'm doing this with the utmost of my ability, and I'm doing this to celebrate who you are. You've given me this gift, and I want to celebrate it and offer it back to you. Now, as with all of the pathways, there are a few things about which we should be careful. It's possible that something that started out as really helpful, as a routine that was really symbolic and God spoke to us through it, can lose its meaning, can become emptier. Eventually, it can be just something we do out of habit. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because God can renovate, can renew those experiences if you ask him to. But if you find it is just an empty ritual, it doesn't mean anything to you anymore, you can stop. Or pause it, at least for a season, until God renews it for you. So even, dare I say, coming to church each week can be an empty ritual. We come out of habit, maybe we come to see our friends, rather than coming with the expectation that we're going to worship God and we're going to meet with God. If it's become a little bit of a habit, then as you're coming to church, whether it's walking, driving, riding on the bus, however you get here, come with the expectation of meeting God. Ask him to meet with you. Ask him to give you his Spirit to inspire you in your worship. Come looking for him. Come not, what am I going to get out of this service, but how am I going to meet with you in this service? Another thing to watch out for is that it's possible to become a little bit judgmental of people one way or the other. If you're not somebody who finds ritual and symbol helpful, and particularly if you've been brought up in a fairly staunch Protestant background where we've looked down our noses at people who have icons in church and things like that, then it's quite possible actually to be judgmental of them. Or equally, if you're somebody who really does find engaging with those sorts of things helpful, well, how could you have just such a plain church, for example? Now, all of the pathways could have that danger with them, but it feels like this is a bit more of a binary pathway. Either you really engage with it or you don't. There doesn't seem to be such a middle ground here. It'll be interesting for you to find out when you do your scoring where you sit in that. And remember, these rituals, these symbols are not God. they're a pathway to Him. We don't worship them, we use them to help us worship Him. Now, as with the other weeks, I've asked a couple of folk to share with us about some of the ritual and symbol that they use. And very bravely, Pam and then Joy and Adrian have offered to share with us some of their experience. So, first of all, Pam, welcome. I know that the microphone was a little bit noisy previously, so I've stuck a spongy thing on the end of it in the hope that that will help us out. That working? Yeah, that's working.
And I'll try and hold it properly. Hold it like this. Is that right?
Go for it.
I'll go for it. Hello. So, a little bit of background to what I'm going to talk about, which is sort of personal devotional time. So, I grew up in a Christian family. My parents had what they called a quiet time every day. They tried various things with my brother and myself, and I saw it as part of the morning or evening routine, like cleaning my teeth. It was only many years later that I realised spending time with God was something that they actually wanted to do, and that it can be a two-way thing, not just doing a reading and asking God for a list of things. I can actually receive and hear God speaking to me personally. So since returning to faith as an adult, I have had a regular devotional time each morning, because that's the time that suits me best. Where possible. Obviously, children, teaching all the time does make a difference to life. But generally, that's what I would do. And I've used a variety of resources over the years. However, Nick has asked me to talk about what I use now, which is called Lectio 365. So, just to explain what Lectio 365 is. So, Pete Greig, who you might have heard of, and the 24/7 prayer movement introduced Lectio 365 a few years ago. It's a free app. Yes? Could I?
It can't go any louder, but I think just project as if you're a teacher, Pam.
No, surely not. Surely not. So, I'll start that bit again, okay? So, Pete Greig and the 24/7 prayer movement introduced Lectio 365 a few years ago. It's a free app which can be downloaded onto your phone. It's brilliant. There's an opportunity, of course, to make a donation to Lectio online. So it is free, you can make a donation. There are morning and evening devotionals, and you can read them or listen to them. Each morning has a pattern based on the letters P, R, A, Y. Oh, they're clever, aren't they? You know, that means pray. So P is, first of all, to pause. R is reflect. A is ask. And Y is yield. So the pause starts with the same prayer to help you just be still and recenter your scattered senses upon the presence of God. I think I nearly always, every day, have to recenter my scattered senses by the time I sit down to spend time with God. And this is followed by a prayer of approach, which is all part of settling into this time with God. Rejoice and reflect is the next, with a few verses from a psalm, a short passage, and a reflection on the passage. Ask is next, where you can ask God to guide you in whatever you've just read, and then pause and pray. Ask is next, where you can ask God to guide you in whatever you've just read, and then pause and pray. Yield is the final section, with the passage repeated with a time to respond, and a closing prayer then follows. With Sundays, there's a slightly different Sabbath day of rest reflection. The evenings are similar, but follow a pattern of reflect, rejoice, repent, and rest. My son-in-law is a vicar and recommended Lectio to his congregation. Some of his older ladies use the evening one, and they confess that listening to it sends them to sleep. He, of course, told them not to worry. It's actually a beautiful way to go to sleep. Sometimes the normal pattern of readings can be adjusted. For example, to remember heroes of faith, or on saints' days. If something big happens in the news, for example, the outbreak of war in Ukraine and the death of the Queen, the reflections are amended accordingly. I found that quite amazing on the day that the war broke out, that they just stopped what the series they've been doing and turned to pray for Ukraine. And the same with the Queen. The Lectio, so that makes it very relevant and very real, actually. The Lectio 365T of currently 11 writers include the Archbishop of Canterbury. And they use several different Bible versions, even within the same day. And it's fascinating. And you know, if you're always reading the NIV, sometimes different versions just give you as if it's a new verse altogether. It's really helpful. If a day is missed, for whatever reason, there's a calendar so you can do it the next day. I thoroughly recommend Lectio to you. Many times I've felt God speak to me personally. It can be profoundly moving and make the tears flow sometimes. On November the 9th, I read, "Trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure everything out on your own. Listen to God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track." That's from Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6, in the Message.
Thank you, Pam. And to join Adrian double act? Oh, it's just Adrian. Not quite a double act.
Well, hello. Just a show of hands, how many people have actually used Lectio 365 already? Right, wonderful. So just to affirm what Pam was saying, I was a reluctant user of Lectio 365 when it was introduced to me as part of a regular church staff meeting. And you know, what's this all about? And I found it really, really helpful, as Pam was also saying. But you can use it as you want to. It has a little button, if you wish to, you can press the arrow and you can hear the person who's providing the thought for the day actually going through it, which helps you to pace it. Or, which is what I tend to do, you can just read it. I think probably it's a good idea to press the button, because then that stops me from rushing it. I think it's you do need to give it time, but it just to say, it is a great way. I just use to start my day. I'm a very naughty boy, and I'm very bad at engaging outside church with the Word of God, until I discovered Lectio 365. And I found that extremely helpful. And that's generally what I start my day with, where my eyes open and I can just about read, switch on the phone and go through what is being said to me that day. And I think it's also useful to go through the passage and think which particular word is speaking to me today. And there's always something. I think now I'm not dare I say this, not a great fan of the Old Testament generally. I love the New Testament, particularly John's Gospel. But I do find that when I'm forced to look at passages of the Old Testament, there's stuff there which is actually extremely useful. And therefore Lectio has been a real blessing in helping me to really understand that I don't know much at all. God does. And God will point me through Lectio 365 to what he wants me to think today. So if you don't use 365, please give it a go, like I did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And George.
I can't follow either of those two. They have promoted 365. I can only say that I too follow it and I would recommend it highly to anybody. But really, I just wanted to say tonight, just something a little bit different. Just when new things do come, give them a chance. This is a brilliant system with the creative pathways that we're following. It's telling us that there are things that you might like to try, and you might in fact find them helpful to you. I'd like to just take you through a little bit of my life story at one stage. I was born in a Christian home. We went to a Methodist church in Newquay, and I got used to the Methodist church service. And it was in the Methodist church that I found Jesus, or probably I should say he found me. And that was fine. When I moved, I went to another free church and worshipped there. But eventually I found myself in Germany. I was teaching for 3 years at the children's forces schools in Germany. And in Garrison, there was one Garrison church. And the whole of the people in the Garrison that wanted to go to church would go to that church. So it gave the people in charge of it a slight problem. How do you bring all these people together with all their different experiences of different denominations, different ways of wanting to worship God, different ways of even seeing God? And what they came up with was that the first Sunday of the month was the Church of England service. The second Sunday of the month was a free church service. The third Sunday of the month was a family service. And the fourth Sunday of the month was a full communion service. Now, I was there for 3 years. I've been brought up in a free church service, and really, the oft-repeated prayers of the Church of England service gave me no link to God at all. But, as I was worshipping with them, and as I was concentrating on what the words were saying, over that period of 3 years, they came to mean things to me that I never thought they would. My approach to God was a very natural way of talking to God. And these words seemed to be too ornate, too full of words. But the more I listened to them, and the more I started to think about them, they came to mean things to me. And all I'm saying is that what we are exploring through these pathways, there are things that maybe you've never tried, but you might find that you are taken nearer to God through them. And certainly I was in what I found out in that Garrison church. One of the things I really was, excuse me, I've just got the glasses. One of those things I really noticed was the beauty of the words and what they meant to me. And one of them, particularly, was when you came to confessing to God what you felt you had done wrong. And even now, I've not found a better way of expressing what I feel when I really feel ashamed of what I've done. Almighty and most merciful Father, we have erred and strayed from your ways like lost sheep. We have followed too much the devices and desires of our own hearts. We have offended against thy holy laws. And the next two lines are the ones that I have never forgotten And I thank that church for actually embedding them in my head. We have left undone those things which we ought to have done, and we have done those things which we ought not to have done. It's simple, it's meaningful. I'm not saying it's the only way to worship God, but these things that I didn't expect to have brought me closer to God. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy. I knew it was a three-letter and there was a Y in it. I was busy thinking about what's coming next, I'm sorry. So, we're about to break into the different activities. I've got a range of things for us to explore this evening. If you're joining us live, this is kind of the time when you might want to engage with some of the things on the worksheets. I hope you've been able to download those today. Over there are about 30 cards which come from a collection called The Christ We Share. And they are a collection of drawings, paintings, sculptures, photographs of things that have come from a whole range of places around the world. And they're all images of Jesus in some way or another. So if you'd like to, you can pick one up, take it back to where you're sitting and just look at it and see what God may be saying to you through it. When you finish, take it back and you can pick up another one or move on to another activity. With each of the activities this time, I've put about half a dozen little guidance sheets to say this is what you could do. So if you want to take one of those with you as well, please do. But if you've got there and there's one left, can you leave that so that people could at least read it and know what's possible? Over here, we have my painting by C. Dakota, which is, as I say, Jesus washing Peter's feet. I'm not going to tell you too much about it, but if you want to, just come and sit and gaze at that picture. There's just a little bit of guidance about what you might like to do as you reflect on that. The holding crosses are back, if you would like to, if you didn't get a chance. They're back near the hand sanitizer back there. So if you want to just try with one of the holding crosses, then please do. Over nearer the door, there's some blank pieces of paper and some pens. If you'd like to draw something, a symbol, draw something that represents something about God, please feel free. Equally, you might like to try writing a modern parable. Could be something from your own life, but just a story that helps you to reflect on something that Jesus said or did. One of these is encouraging you to think about putting Lectio 365 on your phone. I promise you we're not shareholders or anything like that, which is quite incredibly helpful. I've also put a description. There's another app that I use called YouVersion, which is a free online Bible, which you might like to have, and they provide a daily reading as well. There's something about putting prayer reminders on your phone, and you can pick up the monthly daily prayers if you haven't got one already. There's immersive reading. So right at the very far end, I've given you an example of what you might try as an immersive reading, where you put yourself into the narrative and reflect on that as you read. There's another sheet which is just asking you to think about not skateboarding church, but what's the equivalent for you? What could you do as an act of worship to God? It might be active worship, or it might be an act of worship. Or maybe you'd like to think about something you might fast for, particularly during the period of Lent. If you've got a smartphone, how about trying to create a prayer using emojis? And if you think it works, you could send it to someone and see if they get it. If not, maybe you'll have to do a little interpretation. But they're symbols that many people are familiar with. You could just do a whole load of the pray and hand ones, but try and be a bit more creative. There are some post-it notes over here. You can take a couple of post-it notes. You could write on them something, maybe something you've heard this evening, or something that God is saying to you at the moment, something for which you want to be thankful to God for. And take the post-it notes with you and slap them somewhere that you're going to see them on a regular basis to remind you of that. When they get familiar, when you find you're not actually noticing them, put them somewhere else. Can I suggest that post-it note on someone else's forehead doesn't work? If you have been baptized as a believer, then over here we've got some books that we can use for helping people prepare for believers' baptism. You might like just to think back to that moment when you were baptized. Why did you do it? How did you feel? What was going on? And maybe you think, oh, it doesn't feel like that now. Perhaps you could ask God to restore some of that to you. If you haven't been baptized as a believer, well, maybe you could ask yourself, why haven't I? And if you feel it's right, have a word with me. I'd love to talk with you about that. In my mind, I'm penciling in Easter Sunday, so just to give you an idea. I haven't got anyone yet, just in faith. Or you could read the verse that I mentioned earlier on, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, and just change the emphasis. I'd suggest you do that in your head rather than out loud, but change the emphasis each time you go through it. What does that do to that passage? What does that do to you and your relationship with God? That's probably enough for us to be going on with. We will give ourselves, well, I'll see how it feels, but we'll kind of draw to a close at 9 if we haven't drawn to a close before then. Feel free to, as I say, pick up one of the little slips of paper and take it back with you if you need to remind yourself what you're going to be doing. When you've finished, if you can put them back, the slips of paper back, then somebody else can pick them up afterwards. Any questions about any of that? Okay. Explore. would like to take one of the little kind of maroon slips of paper with you to try it at home, please do. I don't need to keep them. If you haven't got the monthly daily prayers, then please take one of them. I would like the Christ We Share images back, please. They were produced by, I think, CMS, Church Mission Society. I'm not sure if the collection is still available, so I don't want to lose them. Yeah, I hope that you found something new this evening, or you found a new way to explore something that you already do. Sorry, let me turn that off. That's a bit better. If there are things that have come up for you this evening that you'd like to talk about, then please get in touch. It'd be lovely to do that with you. And just a reminder, next week we are not meeting, so you can have an evening to do whatever you want, and then on the 21st we will be back here, same time, 7:30, and we'll be doing session 4. So please have an explore as we. And if I haven't packed things away, then you're welcome to have a look. Beth, would you like to just tell us how you want the place left? Because I didn't leave it well last week, so.
There was no blame assigned. But just so you know, we're in here first thing in the morning, so it'd be really helpful if you could help us prepare for that by just pushing the silver tables and chairs to the sides. They can go that way or that way. The key thing is to quite like them out the way of the black mats so that I can bring those out. Don't worry about stacking them, because I'm going to unstack them all in the morning. And then it's just a case of making sure everything else is kind of cleared and put away, tables wiped down. The brown tables that have been used for pudding need folding down and putting away, and that's about it, I think.
Okay, and the
Thank
kitchen.
you.
Lovely.
Yeah, if anyone wants to lend a hand in the
Yeah,
kitchen.
thank you very much to the team clearing up the kitchen.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you all very much. God bless you. Have a good week.